Did I make you nervous?
You never make me nervous. Why?
Well, I thought I saw your hand shaking a bit when you were fixing your makeup over Windsor.
A hangover from the farewell party, I expect.
In old Hollywood, love was rarely quiet. Behind the glamour and the flashbulbs, marriages often burned hotter than the spotlights. And when they ended, the whole town heard the crash. For some stars, their divorces were bigger than their films. These are the love stories that ended in headlines, heartbreak, and scandal. The loudest divorces in Hollywood history.
I've given you all a chance to come over on the right side, and you've turned it down. Now, when I get Vanning, which I will, I'm going to get everybody connected with him. And that means all of you.
1. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. No Hollywood love story was louder or more addictive than Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. They met on the set of Cleopatra in 1962. Both married to other people and were instantly consumed by passion. The world watched as their affair exploded into headlines. The Vatican even condemned it, calling the romance erotic vagrancy. They married in 1964, and for a decade their lives became a theater of love, excess, and jealousy. They drank, argued, and reconciled in spectacular fashion. Their arguments and lavish spending were constant tabloid fodder. Every fight followed by extravagant gifts, including the famous Krupp and Taylor Burton diamonds worth millions. But the same intensity that drew them together eventually tore them apart. By 1974, they divorced, only to remarry less than 2 years later. The second marriage, shorter and stormier, ended in 1976. Burton later described their love as a kind of madness, a phrase now inseparable from their legend. And that's exactly how the world remembers them. Not as husband and wife, but as two burning stars that collided twice and left a crater in Hollywood's heart. 2. Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra. In the early 1950s, all of Hollywood was talking about Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra. She was MGM's dazzling beauty. He was a star in decline after a brutal career slump. Together, they were fire and gasoline. They began their affair in 1949 while Frank was still married to Nancy. The backlash was fierce, especially from Catholic circles, and his public image suffered. They married quietly in Philadelphia on November 7, 1951. Their marriage was chaos, jealousy, shouting, and uneasy reconciliations. Frank's career faltered while Ava's rose, feeding his insecurity. MGM had already canceled his film contract in 1950. She, in turn, grew tired of his drinking and emotional storms. In 1953, after a fierce argument, Frank fell into depression. Biographers report he attempted to harm himself. The wounds were minor, and the incident kept quiet at the time. Ironically, that same year his career was reborn with From Here to Eternity. He won the 1954 Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Ava spent long stretches in Spain and admitted to a brief fling with bullfighter Mario Cabre during Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, a confession that inflamed Frank's jealousy. They finally divorced in 1957, closing one of Hollywood's most passionate and destructive romances. Years later, Ava summed it up simply: "He was the love of my life, but we destroyed each other." 3. Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball. They made the world laugh, but couldn't save themselves from heartbreak. Lucille Ball met Desi Arnaz in 1940. They married that year and, a decade later, built a television empire with I Love Lucy, a series that became the most-watched show in America for 4 of its 6 seasons and rewrote the rules of TV comedy. Off-screen, the strain mounted. Arnaz's drinking and infidelity, the grind of production, and the glare of fun turned private pain into public rumor. By early 1960, Ball filed for divorce in California, citing extreme mental cruelty, even as the pair were finishing their final hour-long specials together. The split formalized what fans could not see. The Ricardos were fiction. Lucy and Desi were breaking. And yet, the story didn't end in bitterness. They remained close for years, co-parenting, staying in touch, and acknowledging how much they had created together. Until Arnaz's death in 1986, Ball died in 1989. Their marriage ended. Their bond and legacy didn't. 4. Joan Collins and Anthony Newley. When British actress Joan Collins married singer-comedian Anthony Newley in 1963, it looked like a perfect match. Two glittering entertainers at the top of their game. But behind the charm, the cracks began early. Newley was brilliant, but deeply insecure. As Joan kept working and her profile stayed high through the mid-1960s, jealousy and constant rumors took their toll. He was also repeatedly unfaithful, and tabloid reports laid his affairs bare, humiliating her in public. By the late 1960s, the arguments had turned bitter. Collins later said she felt belittled and emotionally bruised, while he accused her of neglect. Then came Newley's 1969 film, Can Hieronymus Merkin Ever Forget Mercy Humpy and Find True Happiness? An overtly autobiographical fantasia about his sexual adventures, with Collins playing the on-screen wife. Critics called it self-exposing. Joan would later say the film helped sink the marriage. In 1970, Collins filed for divorce. It was finalized in 1971. The tabloids devoured every detail, casting him as the errant genius and her as the wronged star. Looking back, many summed up the wreckage in one word: ego. Their breakup wasn't quiet. It was international, messy, and unforgettable. 5. Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio. When Marilyn Monroe married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio on January 14, 1954, the world saw a fairy tale. Hollywood's brightest star and the Yankees' icon. But behind the smiles, the tension was real. Joe adored Marilyn but struggled with her global fame. He wanted privacy. She was becoming the most photographed woman on Earth. The breaking point came during the New York publicity shoot for the 7-Year Itch, the now iconic subway great moment on September 15, 1954. The spectacle and the crowd fed Joe's jealousy, and the fallout was immediate. Their marriage lasted just 9 months. In October 1954, Marilyn filed for divorce on the grounds of mental cruelty, appearing visibly upset as she told reporters the marriage had to end. Years later, after her death in 1962, DiMaggio arranged a small private funeral and kept Hollywood at arm's length. For roughly 2 decades afterward, he regularly had roses delivered to her crypt, often described as 3 times a week, and he never remarried. Their love story ended in heartbreak, but its echo still haunts Hollywood, a reminder of how fame can corrode even the deepest affection. 6. Humphrey Bogart and Mayo Method. Before he met Lauren Bacall, Humphrey Bogart was locked in one of Hollywood's most volatile marriages. His third wife, Mayo Method, was a fiery actress with a temper to match his own. They married in 1938, and soon the press was calling them the Battling Bogarts. Their reputation for alcohol-fueled arguments became tabloid lore. Drink often turned tension into chaos. Friends later recalled nights that ended with shouting, broken glass, and, reportedly, one drunken quarrel in which Mayo attacked Bogart with a knife, leaving only a minor wound. Bogart was said to describe their life together as 2 scorpions in a bottle. These details come from memoirs, biographies, rather than police records, so they're best treated as well-sourced anecdotes. By 1944, the marriage was coming apart for good. After meeting Lauren Bacall around the time of To Have and Have Not, 1944, Bogart finally left. Their divorce was finalized in May 1945, closing a bruising chapter and clearing the way for his most famous romance. The legend of the Battling Bogarts endures. A cautionary tale of passion pushed past the breaking point. 7. Charlie Chaplin and Lita Grey. When people say Hollywood scandal, this is where it all began. By 1927, Charlie Chaplin was the most famous man in the world, until his marriage to Lita Grey exploded into one of the ugliest divorces in film history. They first met when she was 12, a child extra in The Kid, 1921. Years later, at 16, she returned to appear in The Gold Rush. When she became pregnant and Chaplin was 35, the situation threatened both a public scandal and possible prosecution under California law. To avoid ruin, they secretly married in Empalme, Mexico in November 1924. Life inside Chaplin's mansion, Lita later wrote, felt like comfort behind bars, luxury without freedom. The marriage quickly soured amid jealousy, control, and alleged infidelity. After two sons, Charles Jr., born May 1925, and Sidney, born March 1926, Lita filed for divorce in 1927, and Hollywood erupted. Her 42-page complaint accused Chaplin of cruelty and unnatural acts. The allegations were so explicit that the case dominated front pages for weeks, turning a private disaster into a national spectacle. On January 11, 1927, the court froze Chaplin's assets during the proceedings. He eventually settled for $825,000, the largest divorce payout in U.S. history at that time, worth over $14 million today. The case nearly derailed his career, delaying production and shaking his image as the world's beloved comedian. This wasn't just a divorce, it was the scandal that taught Hollywood how much one broken marriage could cost. 8. Ingrid Bergman and Petter Lindstrom. In the 1940s, Ingrid Bergman was America's sweetheart, elegant, gifted, seemingly flawless. But in 1949-1950, her private life ignited one of Hollywood's biggest moral scandals. Bergman had married Swedish physician Petter Lindstrom in 1937, and they had a daughter, Pia. While working in Italy with director Roberto Rossellini on Stromboli, she fell in love, became pregnant, and left her husband, all while still legally married. When the news broke, the backlash was ferocious. On March 14, 1950, U.S. Senator Edwin C. Johnson denounced her on the Senate floor, calling her a powerful influence for evil. Studios and exhibitors in the U.S. largely shunned her films for several years. She divorced Lindstrom in 1950, gave birth to Rossellini's son that February, and married Rossellini later that spring. Time eventually softened the scandal. In 1956, Bergman returned to Hollywood screens with Anastasia and won the Academy Award for Best Actress, completing one of cinema's great comebacks. Her split from Lindstrom was more than a private breakup. It was a cultural earthquake that showed how even an adored saint could defy convention and pay the price. 9. Gloria Swanson and Herbert K. Somborn. Before Sunset Boulevard crowned her a legend, Gloria Swanson lived a scandal fit for the silent era. She married Herbert K. Somborn, then president of Equity Pictures and later tied to the Brown Derby, on December 20, 1919. They had a daughter in 1920, and in 1923, Swanson adopted a baby boy. But the marriage collapsed in a blaze of headlines when Somborn, during divorce proceedings, accused her of adultery with 13 men, including Cecil B. DeMille, charges she called absurd and cruel. The uproar was so intense that a morals clause was added to her studio contract. By 1922-1923, the divorce was legally secured, and the sensational coverage only grew. The scandal could have ended her career. Instead, Swanson turned notoriety into fuel. Within a few years, she was again among Hollywood's most highly paid stars, proof that even a public shaming couldn't dim her radiance for long. What began as private humiliation became one of early Hollywood's first true media circuses and an unlikely prelude to reinvention. 10. Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher. It was the betrayal that shocked America. In 1955, America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds, married chart-topping singer Eddie Fisher. They soon had 2 children, Harry and Todd, and looked untouchable. Then tragedy struck. On March 22, 1958, Elizabeth Taylor's husband, Mike Todd, died in a plane crash. Fisher, a close friend, began consoling Taylor, and consolation became an affair. The revelation detonated a national scandal. Fisher's squeaky clean image collapsed, his network variety show was cancelled, and headlines turned him into Hollywood's latest cautionary tale. Reynolds filed for dissolution, and the marriage ended in 1959. On May 12, 1959, Fisher married Elizabeth Taylor in Las Vegas, a union the public never forgave and that Taylor herself would later call a grievous mistake, born of grief after Todd's death. History closed the circle a few years later when Taylor left Fisher for Richard Burton during Cleopatra, and Reynolds and Taylor eventually reconciled. For mid-century America, though, the Reynolds-Fisher divorce marked the end of innocence in studio-polished love stories. Proof that even golden couples can shatter under the glare of fame and fate. In the golden age of cinema, even love had a script, and it rarely promised a happy ending. The cameras have long stopped rolling, but the echoes of those heartbreaks still linger in Hollywood's hills. This is the first part of our look into the most dramatic Hollywood breakups. Part 2, coming soon this week.